Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the City of Alameda Mayor's Town Hall. I'm Sarah Henry, the city's Public Information Officer. Joining us today are he's super, but School Board President Mia Bonta, AUSD Superintendent Pasquale Scuderi, and Alameda parent and pediatrician Lisa Siskin. Please note, all participants have been muted. If you'd like to submit a question for the mayor or our speakers, please use the chat feature. All of our town halls are recorded and available on the city's website and our YouTube channel. I'd now like to turn today's town hall over to Mayor Marilyn Ezzy Ashcraft.
Thank you, Sarah. And I want to thank all of our special guests. They are all super. We are so fortunate to have, yes, Superintendent of Schools Pasquale Scuderi, Pediatrician Lisa Siskin, and School Board President Mia Bonta, and some other AUSD officials or staff are on this call too. And so these Friday town halls that I've been doing almost since the beginning of the shelter in place way back in March have just been a great opportunity to help inform the community of topics of the day, and this is an ever-changing, very fluid situation we've been in. We get more information every day. We try to get it out to all of you. It also is an opportunity for you to answer questions, to have your questions answered, and as Sarah said, just go into that chat feature and type away. But now I'm really excited to have all these guests today because this is now August, and at the end of this month, school will be starting, and we'll be hearing about what form that will take. And I just want to hear from all of our guests, so I am going to introduce, with great pleasure, Alameda's Superintendent of Schools, Pasquale Scuderi. Welcome, Pasquale. We're excited to hear from you.
There I am. Am I back?
You are, yes.
And I'm not sure if folks can see my screen.
I believe they can. I can. Yes.
All right, great. Well, thank you very much for having us. And as you stated, Mayor Ashcraft, we have Mia Bonta, our board president, with us. And I want to thank some of my staff for being with us as well. Our community relations officer, Susan Davis, as well as our chief business officer and chief human resources officer as well. I'm going to try to just present a very kind of stripped down version of our most recent community message, because I think it encompasses the things that we're dealing with most immediately in AUSD. So for parents out there who already received this, forgive me. This first slide is just to kind of give folks a sense of how fast things have shifted and how dramatically things have been shifting over the summer. As recently as July 2nd, we had joint guidance from the County Office of Education and the County Public Health Officer encouraging us to prepare for in-person instruction. Most of you know then our county experienced a big surge in hospitalization and case rates in the first 2 weeks of July. That changed our thinking. We sat down with our school board on July 17th with the intention of saying, hey, let's hit the pause button. During that meeting, Board President Bonta was reading guidance that was coming through from the governor's press conference, which really kind of sealed the deal on opening in distance learning. So a lot of shifts for us in the past month alone. Just to refresh what we're trying to do in AUSD is offer two models. This has been our approach all along, a remote model that will be in virtual space, will be an online option for families and students for the entire year, irrespective of what happens with the public health data. And then our flexible model, which we built with the assumption that we would be starting in-person instruction in some modified way, and then have the ability to shift into distance or remote learning if and when that need emerges. And it has emerged sooner rather than later. So we'll be starting in distance learning. People have asked what is going to happen before we are able to reopen schools. Many of you know that the governor's guidance from the 17th says that schools in counties that are currently on the monitoring list, the state monitoring list, and that includes Alameda County at the moment, have to be off that list for 14 consecutive days before we can start having the conversation about reopening. And Dr. Siskin can get into some of the metrics that folks are looking at, but we watch this data daily. Are there enough tests being given in the county? What is the 14-day case rate, the positivity rate, and then things like hospitalization rate, et cetera. So these are kind of the broad-based metrics that county and state officials are looking at. The takeaway for us is that the Alameda County, our county, is still on that list. Unfortunately, we have had some issues with data at the state level. So our current understanding as of yesterday with public health is no one's coming on or off that list in immediate or near or within the next day or two at least, and probably longer. And one other thing I wanted to get out there is that the county has affirmed to us over and over again that it is county or regional data that they are looking at and that we should be looking at, not individual city data, because I'll get the calls, and I'm sure you folks have too, about Alameda's case rate is different than Hayward's, is different than Oakland. How does that factor into our decision, et cetera?
Yeah.
I'll do just a quick run through on distance learning. People have asked what's going to be different this fall from us. Well, we've had a lot more time to kind of focus on how we're going to operate in virtual space. So if there's questions or comments, I can kind of address that in specifics. I won't go through all of these bullets. I will say that special education is very much on our mind. There are a few population groups or student groups within our district that have been impacted more acutely from distance learning, and how we deliver services that have for years required on in-person instruction, occupational therapy, physical therapy. That remains a challenge. And then lastly, what I'd say is there's these questions about these waivers for in-person instruction. A lot of people have, in some corners of our district, that's gotten hopes up, and in other corners of the district, it's got our anxiety up. What I can tell you right now is that this is going to be a process that's defined by county public health. And as of yesterday, that process is nowhere near being defined. So the notion that we would have this waiver application to bring K-5 back earlier really still needs to take shape. There is not a lot of concrete information on what that process would look like. And I won't read this slide, but just in closing, we are doing three things. We are longing for the days when we just had a stressful mid-summer to get open, but we are really working on three levels to make our distance learning as good as we can, to really be prepping for that moment where we can shift into in-person instruction returning, and then making that year-long remote school option as good an option as it can be for the families who are selecting into that. So that's a speed dating version of where we're at, Mayor, and thanks for the time.
Thank you, Pasquale, for that overview and for your slides. And yes, when I was on the call for elected officials this past Wednesday, I did ask the question, well, could we look at our city's rate as compared to the county's rate when making the decision to reopen? And sadly, the answer I got back was no. They are looking for a number of reasons. They're looking at countywide data. And I do think, well, I think it's when, for schools, when it's the threshold gets down to 200 cases per 100,000 population. But again, you look at a county-wide number. Citywide, we're kind of close to that because I think we're around 228 per 100,000. But countywide, it's more in the 700s, close to 800. So that's going to be a while, apparently. But now, if you could just explain, when teachers are teaching, so back to school day is, what's our date?
27th,
August 27th. And so will the teachers be teaching from their classrooms, doing their distance learning from their classrooms, or does it vary by teacher? How will that work?
It's still the subject of discussion and negotiations. My sense is that we'll wind up with that as an option for teachers who may have challenges with broadband and equipment at home. I think mandating that is probably something that we're not going to get to for a lot of reasons. You know, many of our teachers are dealing with the same issues that our parent community is dealing with in terms of their own childcare issues, their own way of managing their lives, and all the barriers that this has put up. So I'll, in particular with my HR chief on the phone, I'll be very cautious about talking about an item that we're still negotiating, but my sense is that it'll be there as an option.
Sure, thank you. Board President Mia Bonta. Mia, can I ask you, what are the kinds of issues that are top of mind for you right now?
Well, thanks so much for having us. I think it's wonderful that we're able to have a community-wide conversation about our schools and the state of just managing COVID. I did want to share that first and foremost for me, I've been really thankful for the community process that we've used to be able to get information that we need. So we're kind of at the same time that we're getting information from public health, guidance from the state and the county. The school district has also held, I think, more than 20 town hall meetings, different focus groups at elementary, middle, and high school, looking specifically at athletics, special education. We have town hall still scheduled with our families who are English language learners, with our African American families. So I think the primary push has really been around making sure that we're getting a lot of information around how whatever decisions we're making will impact our community of parents, educators, and of course students. We've had student town halls, which have been the most enlightening, I will have to say. So top of mind is like, are we creating a decision-making process where we're allowing there to be constant feedback loops from students and educators and community members to guide us in our thinking. The second top of mind issue for me is the extent to which whatever decisions we're making, even given our limitations, have in mind the impact that it will have on different kinds of populations and student need within the district. There are inherently significant equity issues related to access to educational opportunities, to the digital, to devices, connectivity on the surface. But more importantly, you know, schools have become such a center and a hub for support and like basic needs like food and mental health supports and kind of taking advantage of the school-based health clinics. So when those things, when the school doors closed up, we also needed to think about the ways in which those resources were needing to get made much more available to our community members, particularly those community members in need. So that's a big one for me personally, and I know for the board. And then finally, you know, the spring was really hard for families and for students and for our educators. And we wanted to make sure that we set ourselves up for a much more robust and positive experience where we could have a sense that our students would actually be engaged in learning and that learning would be as rigorous as possible given the medium, and that our students would not experience an incredible amount of learning loss during that time. And I just have to applaud the superintendent and his leadership team and our site principals, our educators, who really just stepped up and have been working tirelessly. Hello, Lego. To make that happen. But those are the kind of three things that I think we've all been focused on.
Did the dog want to share anything there, Mira?
I don't know, Lego, do you want to talk about working from home?
Hi. He likes having kids at home, no doubt. Well, and you raise a good point. I was really gratified to see that AUSD kept up the student meals for any students. In fact, they didn't even have to be AUSD students. Anyone 0 to 18 could go to the, I think, twice weekly meal pickup, which still is happening out at Alameda Point Collaborative is one of the sites. I think there's 3 sites across the city. And I give a huge shout out to not only the superintendent and staff, but the teachers who pretty literally from one day to the next had to talk about pivot. We've learned these new words in our vocabulary over the spring and summer, but I mean, one day you're teaching in your classroom and the next day schools are closed and you're teaching from a distance. So, and the parents have had to be really flexible too. And so we have both a parent and a pediatrician, Lisa Siskin, and I would love to hear your perspective. I was actually listening to NPR this morning, and there was a Q&A they had with actually people around the country asking questions about going back to school, which, as you can imagine, varies from state to state. But one of the things they were talking about is how will schools know when it's medically safe to go back to school? Can you share what your thoughts on that might be from your perspective? So I just throw you a fastball.
Yeah, and first and foremost, I'm parent and community member. I do happen to be a pediatrician in Oakland, and I think the hardest thing about this all is that things are constantly changing. I mean, this has only been around for 5 months and 5 or 6 months. And, a lot of new data is constantly being put out. And in terms of when it will be medically safe, I mean, I think we're probably not going to get to, a zero risk level at any time in the near future, even, with a vaccine, it will take time to vaccinate everybody, but I guess that, so there's never going to possibly be kind of a zero risk, but the question is, when and what evidence do we have for when it will be, safe enough. And I mean, there's a lot of things we know. We know that, wearing a mask really makes a huge difference in terms of transmission. We know that distancing makes a huge impact in terms of transmission. And so, a lot of, I think getting community numbers down is a huge, something that needs to happen before, and this has already been laid out by the, public health department and, the state, but, we do need everyone to comply with masking and social distancing in order to get numbers down. And then I think, really importantly too is, with new and emerging data that we really need to look at, not just like when can schools open as in K through 12, because it's very different. The younger age group versus the high school age group versus the elementary age group. I mean, there's a lot of data that shows that, older kids 10 and above, there was just that huge study out of, which was like a public health, like if, the public health infrastructure they have out of Korea is something that we can't match in our country, but, that just showed the data that, kids, and to be clear, they lumped 10 through 19 all together. So they didn't differentiate, closely 10 to 12, 12 to 15, but that the older kids, do transmit like adults versus, younger kids. It's a different story. So I think what's going to be important is kind of looking not just at K through 12 school, but looking at specific age groups and when it's going to be medically safe to send specific age groups back into the classroom.
And you raise a good point that the interim county public health officer, Dr. Nicholas Moss, raised on the call this week, that it may be that when schools open again, they may start with the elementary students for that very reason. So I know they're all waiting for more data to come in too. And then before we jump into questions, because Sarah tells me we have, as you might imagine, lots of questions from our listeners. Lisa, do you, you're a mom, you're a pediatrician, you understand, as I think everyone in the school district and hopefully everyone on this call understands, the importance of masking and also the importance of adhering to the guidelines of socially distancing 6 feet from people who don't live in your same household. I mean, there is that exception. You can have that social bubble of 12 people, but the same 12 people. And even when you get together, you're supposed to do the social distancing. I have both seen with my own eyes, read a little on social media, and have had told to me about young people in Alameda having parties, getting together, definitely not socially distancing, wearing their masks. And I'm the mayor/nag who always carries masks in a Ziploc in my purse and will offer them to you if you are maybe somewhat forcefully, if you're not wearing one and you pass me on the street. But whenever, usually, not always, but the teenagers that I talk to, I'll say the same thing. We're fine. We're not going to get COVID. So do you have any tips, any ideas for messaging to get through to that particular demographic?
I wish I did, but I agree. I think that's a hard demographic. I mean, right now we are seeing a lot of, we've kind of limited who we're bringing into the office, but we're bringing in a lot of entering kindergartners initially with the idea that they have to have a physical before they're allowed to start in public school. And it's amazing how well these 5-year-olds are wearing masks. Like, they are not taking them off. They are not playing with them.
Wow.
I mean, these younger kids, I mean, I know there's a lot of like, oh, can a younger kid do it? But these kids are kids who follow rules. I mean, at this point, and I haven't had any trouble with the parent maybe has taken off the mask in the room, but the kids are not. And so again, I think, you know, in the younger age group, it's actually perhaps even easier to train them. The high school age group, that's a hard one. And I don't have a great answer, because I think that is the age group that, you know, perhaps may have a little bit more trouble with keeping the mask on. And I think just, you know, education, but it's hard because, you know, that just developmentally where they are in a state where, you know, they're a little bit invincible. So.
Yeah, okay, well, maybe we'll get some kindergartners to do masking messaging. That's a great thought. Sarah, I know the questions are just flowing in, so why don't we jump over to questions?
They are, starting with the first one for the superintendent. Parents that had to choose remote or on-site, they chose it without having a lot of information about the different programs. So somebody's asked, now that there's more information, can parents change their choice?
You know, we're not right now in a position where we can offer kind of a mass change. I think what we're looking at is trying to expand to as many spots as we can in the remote program. I mean, I've understood that critique, and it's a legitimate critique. I think what I'd like people to understand is that, you know, trying to address the need of folks who wanted to be in a hybrid or modified in-person model if possible, but also wanted the guarantee of remote. We were in a very, not in a typical design process of here's the concept, here's how we're going to have to do it, here's how many spots we're going to have. We were trying to do those things all at once during the summer. So I think that is where the information lag was. I think what we've put out, and I would ask folks to look at our FAQs, which are pretty detailed on our website now about both programs, would help people who are still guessing. But to the core of your question, I think parents who are in that spot should continue to reach out to us. Student Services is fielding a lot of calls, and we're going to have to make some decisions about just what kind of expansion we would be able to do in remote, if any, in the next couple of weeks. I think we have some time on our side insofar as everybody's starting in distance learning right now.
Great. The next question is asking for an update on the status of families who are waiting to hear back about getting into the remote learning program they submitted after the July 5th date, but before the July 19th date.
Yeah, I would say right now, conservatively, maybe in a week to 10 days that we would be able to get that information out. There's so many moving parts with staffing, with allocation, with staffing the remote program by grade level, with doing that staffing and seeing how that's impacting the in-person school or the flexible model, because we're pulling staff from a physical school or the flexible program into remote. So I know those delays have been challenging. Our goal still, in talking with our Chief Student Support Officer, is to have schedules and placements across the board nailed down by the end of next week. So mid-August is still the deadline we're pursuing. We may hit some turbulence between now and then for all the reasons I've just talked about, but we're hoping by the end of next week, we're pretty clear across the board.
And just to put this in context a little bit, so the state gave us some guidance, not a lot, and really left it up to school districts to figure out what the plan was. And Alameda chose probably one of the most challenging approaches to this, which is to be able to provide maximum flexibility and safety for the entirety of our student body and our teachers. So we chose to implement a model where we had a remote learning model where students would be exclusively able to, for the duration of the year, doing their learning online, and then this flexible model with the idea that we would have some time physically together and some time online. And I see Ms. Zazo here as one of our guests from the Chief Student Support Officer for the school district, who really, like, that kind of creation of so many different variables of scheduling is an extraordinary effort to really, at the end of the day,
Mind-boggling, Mia.
mind-boggling.
Yeah.
And so again, like, just to kind of like pull it back a little bit, like, I'm so thankful that we've had a school district and leadership that was willing to put as many different kinds of options on the table to provide the most comprehensive set of supports that we could. And we took on that challenge. People have not slept because we've taken on that challenge. And we've also continually asked the kind of the grace of the community, which for the most part, people have been incredibly supportive, which I just want to note, and living in this ambiguity, like the space of ambiguity with us as we're kind of building the plane and flying
And
it.
flying it, yes. I know that drill a little bit too. No, I think Mia and everyone that some of it is just this uncertainty. I mean, don't we all wish we had definite answers and knew what was just around the corner? But I'd say we're all doing the best we can. Sarah, I know there's more questions. Oh, Pasquale.
No, I'm just saying, definitive answers are at such a premium. I've kind of forgotten what that feels like.
Yeah.
Sure. The next question is asking about how will the remote cohorts be developed and what is the timing? They're having a tough time planning for balancing work and student support, and that information would be helpful.
So our academic guidance document that's being worked on right now and that will be released in, I think we're previewing that with principals next week. I think folks will get a sense of what that day looks like. Again, I would refer people, just so I don't go on now, our FAQs on our website also kind of give an outline of how the day might be structured for kids in the remote model. And we're currently, to President Bonta's comment about flying the plane, we're right now still adding staffing to that remote model. So I think if you're really looking at kind of structure of the day stuff, I would really ask people to, again, go to our FAQs on our AOSD redesign section of our website.
Great.
Thanks.
The next question is asking what measures are in place to protect AUSD employees in the office? And this person is asking specifically because they know somebody at a different district who is having difficulties with coworkers not wearing masks, and so they're concerned about our district.
Yeah, that is essentially a non-starter for us. I mean, we will absolutely insist that our employees, if we're going to ask, to Lisa's point earlier, if we're going to ask kindergartners to wear masks, that's not something we're going to be, particularly flexible in any way on. I think how and when we return to school is a big question that we're still working through. That means everything from masking through what kind of role testing might play in it, through the physical safety and cleaning of classrooms, et cetera. But we'll have very, very, very little patience with folks not adhering to that. We've seen our contractors do a good job of that over the summer as construction has gone on at Franklin and Encinal and other places. So there's no reason we won't be able to do that prior to and when we return.
And Pasquale, I'm going to just jump in with a question because you mentioned testing, and I know that is one of the things that has been talked about, testing at schools and maybe a couple times a week. But on this NPR program I was listening to this morning, someone from a school district said, do you know what it costs to do a testing program? That would be cost prohibitive. And the state is just going to have to jump in and help us. So I think we have someone on the call with a close relationship to an assembly member. But just, it did make me think that, at some point, will you need state assistance with funding for some of the precautions that will need to be taken when you do open for in-person learning?
Yeah, I certainly, if our board president wants to add to that, I'm assuming that's who you were alluding to.
Our assembly member, Rob Bonta.
Oh, closer. But I think that's been a huge question for us. I have to say that I think collectively, superintendents across the county all had anxiety attacks when we saw the language in the press release from Sacramento on the 17th saying they are recommending testing. But we don't have a kind of mechanism for how we would pay for that, how we would do that logistically. And I think, Lisa might be able to speak to this more in depth. There's big questions about what kind of testing protocols and what kind of regimens would actually be effective in containing and ensuring the safety of our students. I mean, we're still kind of spinning around and around on temperature checks. So I think testing is not going to go away as part of the conversation. But we seem a great distance between being able to do that en masse.
Yeah, and what I think I'll do, rather than spend too much time on that topic, let's set that aside because that's probably a conversation for another day, and I want to make sure we get to as many of the listener questions. Unless anyone else wanted to jump in quickly on that, Lisa or Mia.
Again, I think it's a very big topic. I mean, I'm no expert on it by any means, but I have listened to a lot of daily COVID updates by our infectious disease, and I know right now that even within our own organization, we don't have testing capacity even to test everyone we want to test or thinks should be tested. And so obviously the testing capacity would have to be a lot higher before that could happen. And I just briefly, one of our infectious disease doctors mentioned yesterday that they, with what the state recommended, which was this like rotating every 2 months testing, a test gives you a point in time.
Right.
It can give you
Right.
that, but they really didn't recognize the great futility or effectiveness of kind of this random rotating testing. So that was just what was presented to me. I don't, have the data behind that, but that is kind of a question that has come up among the infectious disease doctors is how effective and useful is this actually going to be?
Yeah, I think more will be determined. Sarah, what else have you got?
2 questions similar. One person is saying that their daughter's entering 6th grade, and when will they be able to choose courses? When will counselors be able to help facilitate? And then the other question has a high schooler, and they said that they were supposed to pick up their packets this week, and that was canceled. When will that happen?
Again, I'm going to keep using our data. Our master scheduling process, we're trying to do that concurrent prior to knowing which students are in the morning cohorts and the afternoon cohorts. I mean, that is all stuff, again, that August, the end of next week is our goal for that. So I would imagine in the subsequent week, we'll start getting more refined on master scheduling, et cetera. We've really got to kind of establish that morning and afternoon set of, the puzzle and then moving after that. So it will, again, I'm going to fully acknowledge that this is atypical, and we'd have a lot more certainty around course selection and stuff at this time of the year typically, but it's anything but typical. So I think you'll see the specificity around class assignments and coursework take shape after the 15th.
Yeah, and I'll just pipe in. I have a 6th grader entering into middle school at Wood, and a 10th grader entering in high school. And so I know that I, as a parent, just kind of take everything aside. As a parent, I started to see school supply ads pop up over the summer, and there were just kind of like the natural cadence and timing of when things are happening. I'm still trying to orient myself around that, and I think we ended up starting school a little later to be able to allow us more time to be able to secure our planning. I think that ripples down into the kinds of planning that we need to do at the school sites. I know that our principals and site administrators are very busy trying to get ourselves organized in that way. And so, in my mind, I'm kind of thinking whatever I thought is kind of like 2 weeks after that thought. So
that was then.
Yeah. So I think we're on it. I know that site administrators and the district office staff are burning the midnight oil to get us the answers that we want to provide more certainty. And I also know just as a parent that these are incredibly uncertain times, and the best thing that we can do is just know some information. And so thank you all for your questions and your outreach, and for continuing to ask, because it helps us know what we need to communicate. And I guess we'll all have a very modified school supply list this year.
That could be. But Mia, are you seeing a difference in the way your kids are reacting to the uncertainty? Is there a difference between middle? And I know you have a daughter and a son, and there's some different reactions just there. I mean, that was my experience having twin son and daughter. But does high schooler react differently to all the uncertainty than middle schooler, or what do you find?
Well, I mean, my empathy for the question from the 6th grade, like it's a transition point, right? So it's a new experience.
Big transition.
They have my son has no idea what the inside of that campus looks like. He's has a lot of curiosity about it. I think both for my son and their friends and the students that I've been able to talk to, the good news is that they have a sense of what life is going to look like when school starts, because it's going to start in the similar modality, that being through distance learning. And I think their summers are completely off. Like, I don't know how other folks' kids are doing, but time has just taken on a very different semblance this summer, and I think they're all down to every student that I've talked to. Everyone is super excited about the possibility of being able to interact with their friends and see their teachers, and we're all really working towards that. But in reality, Marilyn, as you've shared, the way that we're going to be able to get to that reality is if we all mask up, if we all take responsibility as a community to ensure that we have the lower rate from the county level to be able to ensure that we can open our schools even in a modified way.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for helping amplify this.
Questions are piling up, but I'm going to keep going.
Okay.
All right.
Sarah's hyperventilating. Quick, back to Sarah.
So now that we're entirely online, what is the difference between the structure of the flex and the remote programs?
Well, I think with our flexible model, since the students are going to be starting online, our goal has always been with that in terms of schedule to best approximate a school day. So I think you'll follow something that during the day looks like a version of what a schedule would look like for a student as they progress through that day. Obviously, we're still finalizing negotiations on blocks of time and where that all kind of lands. The remote model is going to be far more independent. That the Acellus program that we're going to use, folks are going to be able to access those classes and log their hours at almost any time. Some families have reached out and appreciated that benefit, because if I work evenings, I can help my students, or maybe I get home from work and my student and I sit down and kind of go through a program from 5 to 7:30 or 5 to 8 in the evening. So it's a lot more kind of self-directed learning in the remote program. And the teachers in the remote program will act as learning coaches and facilitators, kind of looking at the comprehensive way that the individual students is engaged in that online program. So flexible, I think, whether we're in the building or online, is going to look more like a traditional day. The remote program is going to look more like a facilitated independent study program.
Regarding testing, this person says that Sonoma County is offering antibody testing for all their teachers. Could we do this for our teachers in Alameda?
I would have to look into how Sonoma is covering that, both logistically and in terms of cost. So we can certainly follow up in that. We have people looking into our district nurse, Karen Allen, is staying quite up to date on all the protocols that are out there. We've had some parents reach out to us who are kind of in the testing sector, if you will. So we're looking at it right now, and I'll familiarize myself with that model. I'm not sure how Sonoma's planning to pull that off.
Great. Back to kind of the different models. This person says that they were told the only way a student can now be included in the remote or distance learning format is if space opens up. What if they are a priority 2 household? Will openings be made available for those students?
Yeah, I think those are conversations that we would, our student services and admissions folks have taken those calls. So I would say, hey, reach out to us if you're not getting a response. But we are definitely working with families who, from the beginning, we've said, the medical fragility, underlying conditions, those are priorities. We're not going to force the issue and have anyone in an unsafe situation. So please reach out to us directly.
And just for someone whose kids are long out of school, what is a priority 2 household?
Well, they're kind of grades of prioritization. So someone that's got, in the middle, someone's got obviously we're going to prioritize folks who are immunocompromised, folks who have legitimate or long-standing fragility. So there's a graduated criteria, if you will, along that spectrum.
Okay, thank you.
The next person is talking about the structure. They said they're wondering about the advantage of doing 3 classes per semester rather than the full 6 weeks for middle schoolers. This seems concerning for certain subjects. For example, they say a child who's learning Spanish for 1 semester will then not have exposure to the language at the 2nd semester.
Yeah, that instructional continuity challenge has been with us since the beginning, and I'm not going to deny that that doesn't present problems. I think what we're looking at now is whether or not there's a way to address that in terms of having that student take 2 consecutive Spanish classes, 2 consecutive math classes as part of their scheduling. There's some potential solution in there, although there's some constraints, and I don't want to get too far out of the gate with promising that could happen. The reality, Sarah, is that there are many trade-offs and cost-benefit things that are happening in this current moment. And so while that continuity might affect a student in a world language or in math for a year, we just happen to believe that in a wider sense, having fewer things to track and having a fewer or narrower scope of work to follow, given what we experienced last spring, that was one of kind of our priorities in trying to kind of improve upon that emergency provisional model, was just to have a narrower scope of things for students and for students to do, for parents to track, and for teachers to prepare for. So we're still trying to iron that issue out, but it is not perfect.
A similar question, this person asks, will students have the opportunity to accelerate by taking more than 1 math or foreign language per year?
I think that was part of what I tried to answer to the last question.
Double up.
Yeah. So there are ways in which we are looking at that. I think another way that we're trying to address that need is the fact that one of our goals, and many of our board members are very interested in seeing us have a greater level of concurrent enrollment with our local community colleges. That would be an option. A few of our board members for who that's a really priority issue. So new leadership coming in at College of Alameda. We have a team who's working on that. So that's also going to be an opportunity to accelerate. As to whether or not we want that to happen within our own schedule, we just have to look at the long-term ramifications of what that might mean a year or 2 later for those individual students. And that's something, once our counselors are back on campus, we want to take that up with them as well.
Did you want to talk, anything about that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the pullback on this for me is we have often, one of the education, like time on end educational debates is whether you should focus on mastery or whether you should focus on seat time. And I think one of the hidden opportunities that COVID is presenting to us is this idea of whether we can focus on trying to approach teaching and learning from a sense of, of mastery. Are students actually developing the skills and getting the content that they need within the context of any particular subject? And this schedule challenge really kind of pushes us more into looking at a frame of understanding whether or not students have mastered the skills and concepts within the overall scope and sequence of their learning journey and the specific subjects that they're taking. So I think that's our teachers stepping up to the plate, which they have done tremendously. Our site administrators stepping up to the plate and essentially kind of redesigning in a lot of ways, what that curriculum looks like and what that scope and sequence looks like. So for me, it's always ideal to be able to measure from a place of not how much time my kid is sitting in a course over the course of several weeks, but whether or not they're actually learning and whether or not they're taking away the knowledge that they need to be successful. So I'm thankful that people are really trying to be creative in this moment about that.
Thanks.
Somebody's asked about the future of the music program in middle school.
Yeah, we have. Did you want to answer that? Me?
I'm just sad for my middle schooler. And,
Wood School has an amazing band orchestra. They have entertained me before when I've been on tour. Well, gosh, can you, and as a former cello player in the Alameda Unified School District, not very well, I might add, but I mean, is there any way you do distance learning for, I don't know, gosh, you guys, you have harder problems than I do to solve.
I certainly think that we're digging into that. I mean, we have a working group that has been looking at this issue, and there's been some tough language that's come down in the health orders around not being able to do indoors, not being able to do choral music. we still will kind of do our best to keep that music program flowing. We know that's an important part of the community, and music as a subject is so critical. I mean, how many of these subjects do you use both sides of your brain at the same time? The kind of mathematical and creative components that converge when you're talking about music, it's a huge thing for us. We just did a community conversation about athletics, and we're setting up one around visual and performing arts, given the limitations. So I don't want to give
Yeah. So stay tuned, huh?
But yeah, we should have it in the next couple of weeks.
Okay.
This person just asked logistically, how do they take their child out of the flex and put them into the remote at this point?
I would say that you could reach out to student services. We did have kind of a deadline for getting into the remote program, but as I said, we want to be sensitive to needs. So I'm definitely not going to give Ms. Zazzo's email out right direct.
You owe him, Kirsty.
But if folks want to put something in the chat or kind of get us a message, I'll have our communications folks. Susan's on the call. We can do it there. See, she popped up. So
great. This next person asked, for the SLS program, will the entire curriculum be open? First of all, they said congratulations on making that great choice. They said, will the entire curriculum be open, or will it be district selected curriculum?
I think that's something that's still being finalized. Ben Wachowski is taking the reins as the principal of the remote program. Our chief academic officer is working on it. My sense is that we will tend towards a much more open level of access for SLS. Obviously, we want our counselors to make sure that the course selections are in line with what kids need based on their current transcript. And I'm speaking primarily about secondary. But we also know that we're going to want to supplement SLS, and that goes back to my comments about concurrent enrollment and other online options. So I think teaching and learning is taking a pretty good look at that right now. For core subjects, I think we want to keep it focused on what SLS has to offer. But I think we're going to be flexible towards student need and really allow them to kind of be self-directed in that space.
And Pasquale, for some community members who might not have students in the school district, can you just give us a brief overview of what SLS is?
Yeah, there are a number of products out there. SLS is the one that we've landed on. We've used that in this district. Other districts have used it for credit recovery to provide online learning. It's essentially a pre-built, if you will, set of online coursework that students can access. It sounds like I'm kind of depersonalizing it, but it's a completely already built way of accessing coursework. There's built-in videos, there's built-in assessment coursework that folks need to do. It's the kind of thing that we thought buying a prefabricated program, if you will, would be a lot more successful than us trying to do what some online charter schools and online schools have taken 18, 24 months to develop and then constantly refine. We just didn't think we were going to be able to do this on our own in the limited space and time we had, while trying to, as our board president said, we're trying to provide a broad range of options to families, and that's been a tough thing to aspire for. I still think it's the right thing to aspire for, but it's a pre-built set of online experiences, and our teachers will facilitate and support the work that kids do independently in that program.
Interesting. Is it across all grade levels?
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Yeah.
2 questions about childcare. One is asking what is being done to help the aftercare and like providers get the information that they need to formulate their programs. And the other is asking, when will childcare offerings for elementary students be solidified?
Yeah, this is I was gonna use the phrase the $64,000 question, but that certainly does not adjust.
I think the value's gone up. Yeah.
And the urgency around that question is pretty significant. I will tell you, Sarah, and to the audience, that this is still kind of an Achilles heel statewide in terms of planning. Some of our providers are in a position right now, federally funded providers or providers that we pay for with federal funds are taking a similar position to we are, that they are not ready to come back yet. There are various forms of where they are in terms of developing online enrichment, but that doesn't really get to the core of the question, which is what are kids going to do during the day? We have 1 or 2 of our traditional providers who are willing to provide, since we're not going to be in buildings and we're trying to work through that. But it's super important to us that what we provide is accessible to first and foremost, the folks who are most in need in the community. It would be very difficult for me to say we're only going to provide a limited amount of fee-based programming when we've got kids at our Title I schools whose families may be more likely to not be able to do their work from home. So what we're in the process of doing, and I think the mayor and I spoke about this Monday along with the city manager, is really trying to put together an inventory of what's out there. I know Parks and Rec on the city side has plans. Our big dilemma is staffing. If we don't have an agreement, we can't come back to school. Really, the only option we have is to provide licensed childcare in our buildings while they're vacant. We're exploring that option. We're not as far along as I'd like us to be right now, but our goal would be to at least have a couple hundred spots worth of options for families as we move forward. San Francisco is exploring stuff like these community hubs. Again, staffing would be an issue for us on that. So there's a lot of things that still have to be explored. We really need to prioritize our highest needs families and those families of essential workers or families who cannot do their jobs from home.
Thank you. And yes, the city is going to see how we can help in any way possible.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
This person says that Bay Farm has 2 grammar schools. The rate is 139 per 100,000. Is the administration pushing back to get these schools open?
I'm not sure of the question. Bay Farm
I think it's regarding the waiver from the county.
Is it the COVID rate in the 94502
I
area
think so.
code? Yeah, zip code.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's countywide. And also I would add that until we come off the state monitoring list, and I'm not sure how soon that will be, the county health officer is not even considering waivers. And so there was this problem that was discovered with reporting data apparently from the labs, that just all the results were not getting in. And so maybe the optimistic reports the governor announced recently weren't quite as accurate, although we do know that hospitalization rates are down. I think ICU admissions are down, but yet we've got to rely on those numbers. And trust me, I tried to see if we couldn't carve out a little space for the city of Alameda, because I think countywide we have maybe the 4th lowest per capita COVID rate, and that's after places like Albany and I think we might even be lower than Piedmont. But yeah, they're proceeding cautiously, and I do understand that. So
I think this is asking the district, would they be willing to apply for the waiver if the numbers did go lower? If we're
right. And I will.
Mia, why don't you jump in?
Yeah, I will just share that Alameda, yes, has 2 zip codes. For us, it's 1 city and 1 district. And when as Lisa shared earlier, when there is the even slight possibility of considering waivers, particularly for elementary school students, that's going to be a board decision. And I'm sure like many of our board members, are going to be listening to ensuring that we can do something that would be applicable citywide. I think that is something that we are 1 school district. We don't have individual districts within our school district. We are 1 community, and I think that that's a lens that we need to apply our decisions to.
And I'll also note that before Dr. Erica Pond, the previous interim public health officer in Alameda County, and also a pediatric infectious disease specialist, before she left the county to go up to Sacramento to become our state epidemiologist, she talked a lot about looking at this through the equity lens. And that's why when swimmers, and she's a lap swimmer, but she was explaining that we're not going to open condo pools first before public pools, in part because it's really hard to regulate the use of both, but also that there is an equity lens. And we already know that COVID impacts our communities, our Black and Brown communities, at a much higher and more serious rate than other communities. So the best thing we can all do is amplify that message and model the good behavior of wearing your mask, social distancing, washing your hands. I never miss an opportunity to say that. Sarah, we have more questions, I bet.
Yes. How is
toward the end.
AUSD, maybe this one's for Lisa, how is AUSD planning to assist aftercare? Oh, sorry, no. How is the district evaluating the long-term damage to the youngest children for their socialization skills and their eyes from all the screen time? Do you have a medical team?
We,
Wow. Who wants to jump into that?
well, yeah, I'm going to be there at some point anyway, so I can take that on. I mean, I would just say, I just want to make one last point on the last question.
Oh, please.
Note that while the governor and the State Department of Public Health have raised this idea of a waiver to reopen schools, that has been put to local county health officers, and Alameda County, as of yesterday, still has no process.
Right.
So I just want to put that out. I'm not being critical.
No, that's reality. Yeah.
Look, the long-term impacts of being closed are absolutely real. I mean, I think this is the thing that we wrestle with all the time, and it would be our preference to be in buildings with our kids, in learning spaces, in-person learning spaces, as soon as it is safe to do so for both them and our staff members. So I fully acknowledge that. I mean, on the screen time issue, I think that's one of the things that we've been trying to be super considerate around, that we know there was flaws in our model last spring in terms of parents being concerned about time on task and how much time folks were spending interacting with their teachers. I think the Senate Bill 98 has addressed that in terms of some minimums. Our goal, and you'll see this reflected in the kind of drafty schedules that we're working on, our intention is not to put young students in front of the computer for longer periods during the day. More consistent and effective periods, absolutely. But we have never believed that the solution was kids sitting in front of the computer longer. That's not an educationally sound nor physically or socially emotionally sound position to take. The back work or the recovery work we're going to have to do on the other end of this, I think that's something that we're going to have to ascertain once we really see how profound that is. We do plan on giving assessments this year, whether we're in digital space or in physical space, to see what kind of impact the spring had on basic literacy and basic math skills. And I know our social emotional learning, our cost teams, we're going to be making the comparable evaluations of where kids are. We're not in any way, I just want to say it again, thinking that distance learning should mean just sitting in front of the computer. And I think in the schedules we've constructed and in the way our teachers are facilitating classrooms, we're going to try to mitigate that as soon as possible. Is that going to eliminate all of the loss and the complications that lead to those social emotional issues with kids? Certainly not, but our goal is to not compound that until we can return to some sense of normalcy.
Thank you. And Lisa, do you want to just add your thoughts about this topic?
Sure. In terms of, their eyesight, I don't think necessarily spending an hour or two more on the screen a day is going to make a big difference in how their eyes are developing. But in terms of their social emotional development, I mean, we do need to remember that we are in a pandemic. And, I think having, talked with our district and other people, I think the goal is, I think everyone wants to be able to have children back in school. But, first and foremost, we have to realize we're in a pandemic and we need to be safe. And, children are extremely resilient. They're probably more resilient than their parents. Again, I see lots of kids every day and most of them are, doing fine. I talk a lot, I email, with their parents about how they're doing, and most of them seem to be coping fairly well. And again, partly different, actually, I'm going to be honest, the age group that I'm seeing that are having the hardest time are the high schoolers. It's not the younger kids. The younger kids are still happy to be home. They're happy to be with their parents. It's really challenging for the high schoolers. We're seeing a massive increase in depression and anxiety in the older kids. But in terms of the younger kids, yes, I mean, it probably will have some effect on their social emotional development, but young kids are resilient and they will pick it back up when hopefully we can return to school. And hopefully, as we've mentioned with the waivers and everything, that the younger kids will be returning soon, will be the first group that will have the opportunity hopefully to return. So.
Thank you. Yeah, Pascal?
Yeah, I just want to add one other component to it to not lose this thread of what we're dealing with too, is that on that social emotional front too, our students, in addition to the medical components and stressors of the pandemic, we've all seen some very unvarnished and ugly ways in which anti-Blackness has manifested itself, the complications that our kind of racial environment has seen. So we're also very focused on mitigating that part of the issue, or supporting and uplifting families within that. You're going to see a lot of our professional learning before school be focused on that, because that experience for kids and families, particularly our families of color on the verge of this school year and within the context of a pandemic, is also something we have to be addressing. I just wanted to make sure that we acknowledged that challenge before we left today.
Thank you. And then, because Lisa mentioned the difficulty that the teenage patients she sees are having, if I understand correctly, AUSD still has this relationship contract with Alameda Family Services. Mia, do you want to talk about how would a student who is having some difficulties, emotional, mental health issues, could they access help?
Well, I just also just want to hit a little bit Superintendent Scuderi's comment. I think we're in the middle of two pandemics right now. We're in the middle of a health pandemic, and we're in the middle of a pandemic that has exposed to us the kind of incredible racial inequity and bias that we've experienced. And so I'm very hopeful that we can kind of keep centered on that as a community. I know that our school district is starting to do a lot more work around anti-bias curriculum. I know that teachers and a lot of the professional development over the course of the summer focused a lot on making sure to be able to figure out how to center the Black experience, how to make sure that we have active anti-racism practices happening in our schools. I can't tell you how important it is for all of us, particularly for children of color, to be able to know that they have that kind of support from the system that is charged with educating them. To the specific question around kind of still how to access mental health supports, I'm going to leave that to Pasquale to answer. I know Kirsten is also around. My sense is that those school-based health centers are still open, that they're still available people can call in. And we've done a lot of work on our social media channels, on the district channel, and at the school sites for people to, and have actively done outreach. I know a lot of people have still, counselors are still making calls to make sure that we have much more of a, as Ms. Zazo has implemented, a much more kind of case management approach to making sure that our students are actively being attended to. So it's not just about being receptive and being available. I know that there's been a yeoman's effort to kind of be very proactive in reaching out to our students who have indicated being under greater stress at this moment.
That's great to hear. And we have Kirsten Zazo, and I'm wondering, give me a thumbs up if you'd be willing to just speak briefly. Yes, she would. Sarah, can you unmute Ms. Zazo? Hi, nice to see you.
Hi, thank you. So we, going into next year, are making sure that all of the plans that we're developing include social emotional learning and attention to mental health. We know that many of our students have struggled in spring and summer, and we're prepared to have to work with our students in a way that we never really have. So part of the work that we're looking at, so I just want to mention one piece, which is Care Solace. Care Solace is currently available now to all of our Alameda community, whether you're an adult or you're a student. It's basically it's a concierge for mental health. So they work with you to connect you with a clinician. They work with your insurance, and they stick with you until you have your first appointment. And that's available on our website under the mental health. And it's available, again, it's not just for students, but for adults and community members here in Alameda. Second piece is, of course, Alameda Family Services. We have had a partnership with Alameda Family Services for many years now. And they are offering telehealth this year. and they coordinate with our coordination of services teams. So they connect the students to Alameda Family Services, who connects clinicians to students to work directly with them. They also provide groups for grief groups, for substance abuse groups, where students also get to sort of know that they're not in this all alone, that other students are also struggling. So we have a lot of systems and structures put up this next year to really support students. And we know that it's never enough, but we are trying to always do the best we can to support our families and students.
Thank you so much. And if you were to share the information about how to access Care Solace with Sarah Henry, I know she would probably get it up on our city's website too. So for my guests, we still, I'm told, have about 15 questions left. Would you be available for another 10 minutes, or have I already stretched you to the max?
I could go for 10. There's a 4 o'clock that I
Okay.
can't.
And so, okay, let's do 10 quick minutes.
I'm not answering for our board president because I know she has a tight schedule too.
You can, Mia, give me a thumbs up. So, and Lisa, a little longer? Thank you. Okay. Okay. Sarah will do her auctioneer's speed talking through the questions, and you can answer as quickly too.
Okay, doubling up again on these questions. These are about
Yeah.
cleaning. How is the district planning to address the airborne spread through practices such as increasing ventilation in the restrooms, holding outdoor classes, adding HEPA filters, using caution with forced air in classrooms? And then a second is there a plan to upgrade the ventilation, asking about what is the current ventilation? It seems like ventilation is a priority.
Sure.
Yeah, that's I may not get every single bullet in that question, but I will try. Certainly, this has been on our mind for quite some time. We shared with the community probably about 6 weeks ago our kind of initial plan. There's been a lot of discussions about aerosols, in classrooms. Still, I mean, Lisa could probably attest to this better than I have. Some debate between the medical community and the mechanical engineers who put out the information that the WHO then modified their position on. This morning was the first kind of inventory report that I got about kind of the state of our filtration and ventilation systems. Our buildings in Alameda Unified vary in age. So you can have a relatively newer building like Ruby Bridges where the ventilation system there could easily be upgraded to these level 13 filters. You're really talking about both the level of filtration that your system is doing, and you're also talking about the frequency that air is refreshed. And I think they're recommending 4 times per hour. So that's going to be an upgrade for some of our systems. But not all of our schools are in the same place when it comes to this. We will be relying in some places on open doors and windows. We'll be relying on fixing existing systems. I think if we made a complete upgrade of all of our systems, you're talking about a $20 to $25 million upgrade.
Wow.
But we are going to produce that. We've said we're going to be radically transparent the whole way through. So certainly well before any in-person return, that kind of information is something we would put out and try to assess to the best degree possible what the standard it is and where we were above it and where we were below or right at it.
Great.
Lisa, you want to add anything to that?
Sure. I mean, I think, yes, I think there is some question about, is this truly, I mean, we know it's not truly airborne because, I mean, you take an infectious disease like measles, where it's incredibly contagious. If someone has been in that room in the last 2 hours, everyone, and you walk into an elevator where someone's been 2 hours ago, you're still going to catch measles. So we're not talking about that degree of airborne because then everybody would have it. But there is, the question of, if you are in a poorly ventilated, confined space, does it linger in the air? And that's where the question is. But I also think, in our own hospitals, even if you've had a COVID positive patient in the room doing a procedure that generates aerosols, there only needs to be 45 minutes to an hour in between that patient being in there and somebody else. And this is with a known COVID positive patient who is generating an aerosolized procedure. So, I think with the time period that is being allotted in between cohorts, the hour should be sufficient. The other thing is that we are in an incredibly lucky I mean, we're not in New York City where they have, poorly ventilated, 5-story buildings with no windows and doors out to the outside. We are in, California, where the weather is luckily great. And, to be able to utilize the idea of being outside as much as possible, it's snack time, masks do have to be off, let's go outside, made a huge difference. Having even the windows and the doors open, some cross ventilation, has been shown. And when we're talking about aerosols, again, we are talking about, seems like, enclosed, poorly ventilated spaces. And I think in California, in Alameda, we have the luxury of not necessarily having many situations where we are always needing to be in a closed, poorly ventilated space.
Thank you. Sarah.
Yep, next question's about internet. Can you comment on the status of getting internet to kids in need? And then also, how many kids in the district are currently without? And do we expect that everybody will have internet at the start of the school?
Who would like to take that?
I mean, I can tell you,
Pascal, it's yours.
I'm happy to let it go.
No one raised their hand, Pascal. You're the default position. So.
I think we've done, our tech folks and our principals have done a really good job of kind of assessing the problem. We have distributed hotspots for internet service. There are more on the way. There are parts on the island where hotspots, as folks may know, are dependent on cellular service, and where cellular service is weak, that kind of renders those hotspots insufficient. We have been talking with local providers. So I think where device is concerned and where hotspots are concerned, we're going to be okay. I think we are at a one-to-one inventory. There shouldn't be anyone in the district that does not have a device. The internet part of the challenge, I think, is something that's being talked at the state level. State Superintendent Tony Thurmond has really kind of had this conversation about making this more like a public utility question and making sure folks have access. I think this goes back to the question on childcare. In those spots, and I think they are few and far between, can we create hubs or spaces where kids can come in and access internet, at least during the day when they're supposed to be doing their distance learning. So we'll have a much more refined notion about where those gaps exist now that our principals are back and starting to engage with families. We're pretty well covered on the device front, but there still is a small core of internet access that remains a problem.
Thank you.
I'll just share
Mia.
a great kudos and thanks to Alameda Point Collaborative, for instance, that I know independently decided to supply subscriptions to Common Network for all of the residents on Alameda Point Collaborative. They did it at the start of COVID-19, not really, kind of took a leap of faith on that. I'm sure that they could benefit from donations to be able to continue to support that effort. I also know that All Good Living has done an amazing job, as well as just another provider providing devices and connectivity and any kind of basic needs support. And of course, Alameda Education Foundation has been a really remarkable partner in this moment as well. So like many cities, my day job is working in Oakland, and Oakland launched Oakland Undivided, which was a citywide campaign to make sure that every K-12 student would have a device and connectivity and technical assistance. And it would be wonderful if when we kind of do the deeper assessment around whether there is a gap in that, whether we could rally as a community and really exercise the beautiful partnership between the city and the school district around how to be able to support every child in that way.
And knowing our city, I bet we could. And I'll also throw a shout out when you mentioned Alameda Point Collaborative. I connected our amazing IT director, Carolyn Hogg, with Doug Biggs when I heard that there were families out there who didn't have internet access. And Carolyn loves nothing more than a challenge like that. So she was right on it. Sarah, we've got 1 minute and 56 seconds, people.
For the superintendent, this
The
person
bonus round. Yes.
would like you to explain the reason why remote learning needs to be for the entire year, particularly given how quickly things might change in January if a vaccine is found. Would there be an opportunity to then switch to flex? And if not, why not?
Okay, I'm going to try to process the question. I think the idea with the remote only program and why we created it as a standalone option is because we may get to a point where we can come back to school And, you know, like Lisa said earlier in the conversation, we're not going to get to 0 cases. We're not going to get to, there is no absolute risk at all. So we know that even if that happens at any point during the year, any level of risk may be too great for some families who are very concerned for medical reasons about what, you know, contracting COVID-19 and their families would happen. So that standalone model for us is really about addressing folks who have the highest level of need and concern for the entire year. The flexible model as designed allows us to be in buildings when it's safe, but it's constructed in a way that we can kind of lateral back into distance learning if the numbers change. So as our board president pointed out earlier in the conversation, it's certainly not the least complicated, not the easiest thing to shoot for, but I think the way that we're presenting these two options is our effort to address the maximum amount of need that we're getting from a community who's being impacted in very different ways by the virus.
Okay, and then this person says AUSD seems very flexible and willing to allow most or all students who applied to the remote academy within the deadline. Will AUSD be as flexible and open to allowing all staff to work in the remote academy who want or need that option?
Well, there is a limited number of teaching positions that would be in the remote program. It's, you know, our contractual class sizes at present will remain the same and applicable. We're obviously going to try to do whatever we can to support our staff. We've gotten a bit of breathing room now because of the fact that we're all starting in distance, and really aren't going to be able to accommodate. We're going to take those cases on individually. Our HR staff working with our labor partners will really kind of assess those needs. But the reality is we probably at this point we'll have more, you know, fewer spots in remote than people requesting them. And so how we prioritize and work with our staff in kind of sorting that out, we'll do that sensitively and thoughtfully, but I don't want to pretend that there might not be difficult decisions involved in that ultimately.
Thank you. And we are going to have to wrap it up here because we've already gone a little bit over even the extended time. But I want to thank, well, first of all, I want to thank the audience. Your questions were fabulous. I learned a lot. I hope all of you learned a lot. And to our guests, you were awesome. So thank you so much, Board President Mia Bonta, Parent and Pediatrician Lisa Siskin, Superintendent Pasquale Scuderi. You have a Herculean task, but I can see that you are more than equal to it. The city will partner with you in any way we can. These are our kids too. And we wish you all success. And again, for everyone who called in with your or asked your questions, I mean, I feel like I'm probably preaching to the converted here, but this is why it is so important to get the word out that we just need to do those simple things. That mask is so simple but so powerful, but you got to wear it every time you leave your house, and you've got to cover your mouth and your nose simultaneously and stay 6 feet away. These are the things. It's not magic, it's science, it's real. This is what will get our children back to being able to go to school with their peers, to learn from their teachers directly in the same room. We can do it, but it takes a community effort. So parents, please don't allow your kids to host parties. And the dog agrees with me. He will bark at you if you're not wearing a mask. And so thank you all so much for joining us and helping enlighten our community. And I'm so grateful to you. Take care, stay safe, wear your mask. Have a great weekend. Bye, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for listening.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Sarah. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you so
Mayor.
much.
Thanks for having us, Mayor.
Oh, my pleasure. You're great.
Thanks for your
Bye-bye.
time.